Welcome to the Tank Podcast. In this episode, I interview Lucy Kumara and Lilly Markaki of Claire de Rouen Books about their book selections for the summer reader. Who are you, and what is Claire de Rouen?
I'm Lucy Kumara. Claire de Rouen is an independent photography, fashion and art bookshop that was established in 2005 in Soho by Claire de Rouen herself. So it's almost 20 years old now. Claire was encouraged by the photographer Bob Carlos Clark to open her own shop, and he helped find her the space, which was on the first floor of a building on Charing Cross Road back then. And now where we are today is our new space in Bethnal Green, which has just opened, which is very exciting. And so the bookshop has always kind of been focused on presenting material that kind of explores the interplay between the genres of fashion and art and photography. We've recently kind of expanded or broadened the horizon to include writing and some kind of cultural theory. We've always stocked lots of signed books and books made by both very small publishers or individuals, as well as books by quite mainstream publishers. So there's definitely a kind of anti-hierarchical approach. Since November last year, Lilly Markaki has been working with me, and we now are co-directors of Claire de Rouen. That's very exciting because we're sort of charting a new direction or a new sort of focus for Claire de Rouen. And I think from my side, I've been running the shop for 10 years, and kind of there's something about decades that kind of makes you assess, and I think I felt that it would be very good to have a kind of younger voice join me. And we're like a decade apart, pretty much.
Exactly, pretty much.
So yeah, that feels really good.
I mean, I think for me, sort of when the invitation or, I came to join, I was at the time when I had just also published a book, or like the first book, I guess, that I have ever made with like loads of different people, called Love Spells and Rituals for Another World, which is sort of kind of made from queer perspectives on love, sex and care today. So it was kind of like an opportunity for me for the first time to think about the book as an object. But outside of that, I write critical theory, and I have been, I think I would describe myself as a reader probably above anything else. And so it was kind of the perfect moment, and I think, Claire de Rouen is obviously... I think everybody I know feels the same way about the bookshop, but it was kind of like, if there was ever going to be a space where I want to do that in, or to kind of sort of use to explore ideas and books more, it would be it, so it was kind of perfect.
Tell us about the selection of books you made for Tank's summer reader. What ties them together?
It's interesting because I think there are some qualities which are specific about the selection, but the selection also really reflects our kind of broader vision, which has always been to be a sort of interface between cultural kind of makers and to present material that feels authentic. Mm-hmm. And I've stolen your word.
This is good.
Authentic, often kind of independently published, but we're definitely not. We're not into sort of the hierarchy between high and low. So I think I also really love books that are published by quite mainstream publishers, but they might sit alongside something very limited edition made in London or made in Sydney, or I think the emphasis is on kind of exploring the interplay between the different genres of art and fashion and photography and writing. And then more recently, since Lilly joined Claire de Rouen, we've kind of been charting a new kind of direction that's a bit more specific, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think also in some ways we both it's sort of really nice that we have the opportunity to select things which feel quite sometimes personal, but we both have our own kind of, experiences and our own approaches to things, and so there's a really interesting discussion that happens between us.
Yeah, that's true. And I think there's definitely a kind of, exactly, like we bring in material that is kind of created within our sphere of interest, often by people who we know, or we meet through the bookshop, and so there is often kind of a direct relationship to whoever's made the book, which is nice.
Yeah, but I guess our focus is definitely on this in between, right? Kind of this overlap between photography, art, fashion, all these different worlds,
and I think it's fair to say that we're both kind of interested in desire and female intellect and radicality.
For sure.
At the moment. Yep.
How did you go about making your selections?
So I guess actually, this is a nice way to kind of, go into this, because actually I think quite a few of our selections are about, I'm not sure about using the term like female talent, but I think they are, a few of them are made by women who I think are quite prominent in different ways. So maybe that's kind of one, the sort of things that ties the collection together, but it's not always true, but I think we have at least maybe 4 selections which represent women. Again, very different ones, but I think for me anyway, it felt kind of like we were sort of looking at our collection and thinking about which of the books that we have are ones that kind of are forward looking in some ways, or which represent ideas that we think are important for the present. I don't know if you feel that.
Yeah, definitely. I think around the beginning of 2020 there was kind of a kind of sudden like quieting of kind of activity of production, which looking back feels quite natural, but slowly this kind of very interesting kind of new set of perspectives has kind of emerged, and so I think there's quite a kind of clarity in the selection, in that they're all very different and eclectic, but they all have a real sense of commitment, which I think is a very very typical of this particular moment, like commitment to the things you're doing or the things you're articulating, and also interestingly, I think a lot of them are looking back and kind of retrieving material from the past into the present, and kind of seeing how it can be related to what's happening now in a new. It's sort of things that from the past kind of now function in a different way, and are providing like new inspiration, I think.
Yeah, I'm kind of trying to think about the selection as a whole, but I think there's like loads of different themes kind of running through it, but there isn't potentially an overarching one in that sort of way. I think, yes, we maybe also mentioned previously that a lot of them are material that is quite experimental in terms of like the format. Or sort of how they approach bookmaking, which I think is also definitely something we're very interested in.
Yeah, and also really special publishers. There's something from Blank Forms in New York. There's something very special that's self-published. There's actually, there's Stidle, which is kind of one of the most iconic photo book publishers, making like this incredible monograph on Samuel Fosso. There's Primary Information, again from New York, publishing Martine Syms. I think a kind of range of publishing practices as well, from the individual all the way up to the kind of, iconic, I suppose. Yeah.
Tell us about some of the books on your list.
So I'm going to talk about 15 works by David Hammonds, which is by an artist called Kwame Sorrell. We did a beautiful interview with him for Movement Radio in Athens that you can still listen to, about his work. And Kwame, I'm really proud of this, because Kwame approached us and asked if he could make this edition especially for Claire de Rouen. And one of the things that I love about books is that the method of distributing them allows for can be very creative, or can be very precise, or can really kind of affect the way material's received. And so in this particular case, he's just made 15 copies and they're available from us. And we've already shipped them all, all around the world.
Yeah.
And I just think that's a very interesting aspect of making a book that can be kind of forgotten about, how much creativity there can be in that distribution process. Anyway, so the book presents 15 works by David Hammonds, very simply, just one page, one image. And then there's a print in each of the edition, reproducing one of the images of the works.
Hold it up.
And each book has a different print in it, so actually they're all kind of unique. And the print is inserted on the page where the image falls. So it's very precise in its making, which I also love. Another thing I love is books that are very modest in their physicality, but actually extremely they have like this concentrated power.
Maybe I'll talk about this one, which is one of my selections, I guess, even though we kind of work together. But I find this quite exciting because Martine Syms is an artist of my generation, I guess. She's based in LA, and the thing that I kind of love about this book, so it's I guess kind of meant to be mimicking the format of the Bible in a sort of like presentation or the cover. But it's called Shame Space, so there's this sort of like, not contradiction, but this kind of tension there. And I guess what it does is it sort of combines writing, which feels quite confessional somehow, but which is also simultaneously kind of, in terms of like how the writing expresses itself, is like closer to like notes on your phone rather than actual. So there's something very interesting going on there, and then it's the second half of the book is sort of made up of these images, which are stills from one of the artist's video works, and basically, I guess what I really like about these is the way that they feel. They are kind of digital images, but presented in the form of the book, they just gain this other temporality. So if you were posting these as stories, they would sort of just disappear quite quickly. But there's something about kind of, holding on to these memories that somehow don't feel monumental or anything like that, that I really like. But I guess it is this book about how we make the private public, and how, the self is kind of narrated through digital media, which just feels kind of very present somehow. But yeah.
I think the other one I choose to mention right now is this kind of quite substantial hardback edition of Organic Music Societies, published by Blank Forms in New York. Organic Music Societies was the kind of name given to the practice of musician Don Cherry and artist Moki Cherry, his wife, her husband. And this book is a good example of kind of how our own interests and kind of relationships might end up in a book being brought into Claire de Rouen. So I'm good friends with Naima Carlson, who is Smokey Cherry's granddaughter, and she worked very, very closely on making this book. And she has a really beautiful art and music practice of her own, and I'm hoping that we do something with her actually this year or next year in the new space. But I think it's this kind of very like dedicated practice of like retrieval and recuperation and kind of rejuvenation of really important material that feels really significant and important in terms of this particular chapter of kind of avant-garde 20th century cultural history. And then, I think it's also worth saying that when I choose books, often if there is a kind of more anecdotal personal connection, I also respect that. So like for me personally, I kind of grew up in quite a kind of eclectic kind of environment where living in communal living, which is a big part of organic music societies. So living communally, sharing like the cooking, well, I didn't personally, but my mother and the people we lived with, cooking and cleaning and kind of being, uniting in that labour, but also like creating these beautiful environments with artwork, and music was a big part of my childhood. So yeah, it's a kind of just also like a personal, a reminder of my own kind of origins, and I like that. And sometimes that does come into things, which I think is okay.
To hear more podcasts from Tank, you can subscribe on all major podcast platforms or follow us on SoundCloud. The theme music for this podcast is by Himera.